Welcome to Inside the Numbers, folks. I'm your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. I hope you have a wonderful Labor Day weekend. I tried to, but there was no What Are the Odds, which will be rescheduled for next week. And I just couldn't wait till Wednesday. So we're doing something today, even though it technically is going to be a shorter stream. You know what I'm thinking? I want to get through the content I want to get through, and then we can open it up because there are a couple other things that I do want to talk about. But over the weekend, there was the Wall Street Journal poll released. And it dawned on me that maybe I haven't done a recap of this for a while. And only maybe like earliest followers would know what I'm talking about when I'm using this terminology, these words to describe how we look at polling trends. Most people just look at an aggregate average. And for years, what we have done, even though I try not to pay any attention to I'm looking at the results of other polls, but I really do try my best to just ignore them and tune them out because, of course, I want to be ahead of trends. I want to do the work that I'm doing. I don't really care what everyone else is finding. And then ultimately, what I've found is that more often than not, they catch up. All right. So, not trying to be arrogant or anything here, but we're going to go over kind of a textbook example of this. You should really do your best as a pollster to bury your head in your own work and do the best job that you can do and not be influenced by others, which I think has been a major, major problem for this industry, especially in the media and the university side of it. They get into what is textbook really groupthink, and worse. And they don't allow the data to speak to them anymore. They're looking at it as it's coming in and as they're processing it, and they kind of already see they see what they want to see, and then they make it work from there. It's a very dangerous thing in polling because assumptions are the mother of all what, right? And there's a lot of assumptions in this industry when you're doing this job. You're making a lot of assumptions. So, in order to identify trends, we have done something for years that is a lot different than just staring at an aggregate average. The aggregates have been hurt by bad polling data, including crappy ones because they're big names, excluding other ones because they're a threat. But regardless of whether or not they're more accurate, so crap in, crap out, just like in any other model. And what we like to do to identify trends is put them into what we call polling tranches. All right. First of all, what the hell is a polling tranche? What is a tranche? It comes from a French word, which literally means a slice of something, right? A portion of something, right? So obviously, that something is the entire polling universe. But instead of just looking at aggregates, we split them up. And we split them up because I'm a financial guy. I always was was in the beginning. And I look at things, the way I the way I look at markets a lot, the way I've always looked at investment strategy, stuff like that. I know it's crazy, but anyway, this is what it helps me explain it. Laura thinks it's totally not the best way for me to present this to people, but because not everybody, obviously everyone's brain works differently, but it's the way it makes sense to me. So I'm going to do my best despite my dry run with her. She just looked at me like, this is, people are going to be, this doesn't make enough sense. Like, you have to make this make better sense. So the only way I can think to do that is explain what they are, how we define them, and then use some examples. All right. Because that Wall Street Journal poll is an excellent way to show you how I do this and how tranches work. All right. So first of all, whoops, that is the wrong one. Sorry about that. Nope, that's also the wrong one. Excuse me. There we go. Why are these totally out of order? Let's see. That's also not correct. I guess it loaded up the wrong ones. Here we go. All right. So first and foremost, and there's only 3 of these, so we can make this work, all right, pretty simply. And I see why, because some of them are in 1280, some of them are in 2560 times 1440. It's just image and resolution. But this is, in fact, the first slide. You're like, my little bull, my little bears, all right? Because it really is. I look at this very much as, are certain polls more bullish or bearish on a candidate's chances? And then how do we put them into different tranches. All right. So number one is very important. Polls in polling tranches are dynamic. Okay. They are not static. They're not, well, they can stay there, but chances are they are not going to stay in the same tranche over the course of a cycle. And we're going to use this in 2024 as well. So I figured it's a good time now to open it up and explain it. And I'm sorry if you can hear my kid out there. He's out there with a friend. He's having a blast. Yeah, so the polling tranches are dynamic. The polls that are in them, meaning, are dynamic. But the parameters that define each tranche are not. They're static and they're general, right? So as things change and as things move, of course, support for each candidate is going to change. What is it against the consensus is going to change, but the parameters are not. And we're going to get into those definitions in a second. All right. What are those parameters that define each tranche? Right. Number two, again, I just said, pollsters move between tranches. They go from a candidate A bull tranche to a candidate B bear tranche. It happens all the time. And how do we do this? They are measured against the consensus. Simply, and again, you use what you want to use. I am old school about this. Real Clear Politics, for me, is the gold standard in aggregate polling. I don't know how you phrase this other than they didn't discover it. They invented the polling average. They don't have any quirks that say, well, this poll has a house bias of this point and that point. So we're going to adjust the pollster's response based on the bias that we have calculated for this pollster, even though it's a super secret calculation that nobody's allowed to know. And, we're just going to go ahead and basically unskew this poll and put it, adjust it to the result that we feel is the correct result for that pollster. And that's totally ridiculous. That completely. Now, later you can take an aggregate and say the aggregate has underestimated or overestimated certain candidates in certain areas. But taking an individual poll and doing it kind of defeats the purpose in my mind of an aggregate. And there's already a lot of things working against aggregate averages, which is that, 20 years ago when they invented the polling average, first of all, response rates were much higher. Number two, in order to compensate for that, there weren't as different, they didn't need at that time to compensate for it. So there weren't different modes of data collection using different sampling errors and different sampling sizes. It was much more uniform across the industry as to how polling was done. Now, in 2016, when we first released an online tracking poll, we were absolutely eviscerated. That's not a real poll. That's not how polling works. It was completely experimental and to show people that wild gyrations in support for different candidates is not real. They are artifacts. Those movements and those swings are artifacts of the poll and how it is conducted. Artifact meaning they're, well, a better way for me to put it. This is not the textbook definition of an artifact, but in this case, they are flaws. They are being caused by the methodology of the poll itself and the problems with how those polls are conducted. They are artifacts of the polls themselves. The American public, after the first debate, did not swing from a couple of points favoring Obama to a couple of points favoring Mitt Romney. That was or 4 points. That was an artifact of how Pew Research conducted their polling. It was a flaw. It fell subject to a simple response bias. And now in the advent of social biases and they've been around for a long time, but real pressure on people with social desirability bias, there's just pitfalls all along the way. The truth is, Barack Obama always had a lead. He led anywhere, never less than 2 points, never higher than about 5. And that's where it was for most of the time if you factored for the response bias. They just got more people willing to talk who supported Mitt Romney because he had a good debate performance. That's it. So that was, but now, talking about this because these polling aggregate averages now have all these different polls in there, once considered and dismissed as experimental or just straight garbage. Now we have Morning Consult, that is a monster online panel. And by the way, everyone gets now at this point, I guess they stretch themselves, and I know where they're going for responses. Most of these other polls that you see on there, YouGov, they were once their own consumer panel. Now they've overextended themselves, and they have to buy responses from other people. And people are dipping into the same pool of completes. All right, or large. All right. Again, they're measured against the consensus, and tranches ID both trends and bias. All right, so we're looking at aggregate averages and we're looking at trends. That's really what we're looking at. And I'm going to show you this in a little bit. We're going to use a couple of months where there's some really great examples out how polls identified us with a certain tranche and then shifted over time out of them. And we're going to go back to March, actually, March and April, to be with the Republican nomination to underscore this. But if you look at a website like 538, they're also trying to tell you the bias of pollsters. And in order to do that, like I just said, they're using that super secret sauce. Nobody knows about it. And I don't like that. I would rather develop a system that identifies whether there is persistent bias in a polling firm or not. Or are they just late to the damn show? And how late will they be? All right, so yeah, this is slide 1. Let's move to slide 2 real quick. And let me make sure that I'm right about slide 2. Let's look at what a bull. All right, let's look at the bulls first. And then I'm going to give you some example. All right. Here we go. So a bullish tranche, right? So we will say like Trump bullish or DeSantis bullish or Trump bearish, or DeSantis bearish, Nikki Haley. It could be anybody. All right. And then moving to the general election, it's either going to be Biden bullish or Biden bearish. All right. So what does that mean? If it's in a bullish tranche, then it means that the results of the poll are for a candidate specifically. So let's say for this, let's say DeSantis bullish, and then we'll find some examples of DeSantis bullish polling. Same thing, we'll give you examples of Trump bullish polling. It provides favorable results to that particular candidate. And often, by the way, it's stronger than the consensus, but that doesn't necessarily need to happen in order for it to be considered in a bullish tranche. But let's say there's often a DeSantis favorable poll where his support level is not only favorable, but it's, maybe a little bit stronger than the rest of the polling averages have been, or the rest of the field, the consensus has been. But really the key here is that support for opponents is weaker than the consensus. Again, this both is measured against the consensus, and it will identify whether a pollster has an individual bias towards a candidate or not. And it's not that, listen, I just want to clear this up. It's not that a poll is like skewing itself to be favorable to a specific candidate. I'm telling you that does happen, but that's not even the point. The point is there is probably something in their methodology that favors a certain group of people. And because that group of people support candidate A, by disproportionate levels, then it's skewing their polls. So a great example here, all right, would be the Marquette University poll. A great example would be CNN. And let me go down to March of that year, and I'm going to actually give you an example. Now, let's use Real Clear Politics, like I said, because it's just super simple to do. All right. So let's add this to the stream, remove this for a hot second here. All right. I'll make this bigger because I know it's difficult to see. All right. So, and actually, let me zoom in just a hair. I don't want to zoom in too much because I don't want to lose the whole month. But okay. So here is Reuters and Ipsos. They conducted a poll from the end of March to the beginning of April. All right. And then you can see here the month of March. It starts right here, basically with the IBD tip poll. All right. So all through the month of March, Trump had a lead in the consensus of about 15 points, 14 points. All right. So an example, obviously, would be CNN. All right. So not only is this a favorable result to Ron DeSantis. It is way outside of the consensus. They are giving DeSantis a support level that is nowhere near the rest of the polling universe. All right. But not only that, Trump is way lower than the polling universe. There was just an IBD tip poll conducted a couple of days before, and it had Trump at 51% and had DeSantis at 22. It was Trump plus 39. Yet out of nowhere, out of left field, CNN comes in here and it's DeSantis plus 2. Why does this matter? And we talked about this when I released the Florida poll. This is telling us it's not only IDing a trend. Forget about the trend at this point. It's IDing there is a bias in CNN's polling. All right. If this persistently happens over time, which it does for a while until recently, it's a problem. It means there's an issue with their methodology that we are a little bit suspect to. It's very simple when it comes to CNN and Marquette. The polling mode that they predominantly use favored at this time more educated people, even Republican voters, which at that time were backing DeSantis, even in polls that were better for Trump. They were backing DeSantis in higher numbers than they are. And they're not even backing DeSantis now, but back then they were. There was a Marquette poll, no joke, had Trump up by like 2 when the rest of the universe had Trump winning by like 35 points. All right, so way outside of the consensus. What's important about what just happened over the weekend is that first, let me just say this too before we move back. I don't like, and I'm gonna go real quick. Actually, real quick before we go back. Let's go to the 6 months. All right, so here's April, March, and actually there's April right here. But in March, you can see Trump had persistently about a 15-point lead. Even when he went down a little, so did DeSantis, so it didn't really matter. So ballpark, his average lead in that month was about 15 points. Now, just so I'm not being biased here, at that time, we were considered Trump bearish because DeSantis was like 30%, 31 actually, and Trump was at 43. So while we still had favored Trump with a lead, his support was a little bit softer in our polling then at that time. And DeSantis was a little bit higher. So but not so much where we favored DeSantis. So we were still a Trump tranche. We were just in a Trump bearish tranche. Now, somebody who else was in a DeSantis bullish tranche at that period was the Wall Street Journal. I don't like pollsters. And sorry, Tony, it's just true. I mean, if I didn't criticize people on the right the same way, I'd be a hypocrite. So here we go. I've done it for years. I've built my career on mocking people like Richard Hart, who go and poll for Hillary Clinton and then pretend that they're like an objective pollster and poll for NBC News. I don't like when pollsters are connected to either a candidate's committee themselves or the campaign or their PAC. And then they also at the same time are polling for a news outlet. I don't like it when Ron DeSantis' pollster does it with Richard Hart, by the way, for NBC News. DeSantis' pollster partnering with Richard Hart, Hillary Clinton's pollster, Hart Research, to do the NBC News poll, which, by the way, was also in DeSantis tranches the whole cycle. I don't like that. So I don't like equally that Tony Fabrizio is polling for the Wall Street Journal, even though he's partnering with a Democrat, because he is polling for Trump's PAC. All right. So I just don't like it. I don't like it. You should pick one or the other. It's just my opinion. In my opinion, is clear conflict. Tony obviously has a much better track record than DeSantis' pollster. It's not even close. Tony Fabrizio is one of the best in the business. And obviously, I think it's fair to say there's not. If he's polling for Trump and finding more favorable results for DeSantis, then he would be really bad at being unethical because, it's very different than NBC, their poll being much more favorable to DeSantis than the consensus. And yet he works for DeSantis. That one of those firms worked for DeSantis. So, I'm not accusing anybody of doing anything wrong. Well, actually, it's not true. With NBC, I think that's obvious. I mean, we're way outside the consensus and you work for one of the candidates. I mean, you really have to avoid even in like the law, you have to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. So, I'm not going to go poll for the Epoch Times again if I'm going to poll for a presidential campaign. It's not going to happen. One or the other. But anyway, it doesn't look like Tony has allowed any of his relationships to impact his polling because, frankly, it's been all over the place. When most of the field had DeSantis falling to 20%, when, by the way, at this point, we were considered now Trump bullish. We had Trump at or a little bit higher than where support was in the consensus, but we definitely were the first among the first to show DeSantis collapsing. All right. So out of the one time being in the low 30s to collapsing and really threatening to fall into the teens. At this point, which was like May and June, we were in the Trump bullish category. But the Wall Street Journal poll that was conducted in April was very much, or in the spring, whatever it was, very much was DeSantis. You can't even say bearish. You can't because they had Trump so low. Everyone clearly had Trump in the mid 50s or low on a bad day for Trump, but DeSantis was clearly falling, and yet they still had him in like, I think it was 30 something, 34%. It was totally out of the mainstream. So this was really bad news when the Wall Street Journal released this poll this week. All right. And just to give you Trump, yes. So a December poll from the Wall Street Journal had DeSantis beating Trump 52 to 38. And then in April, I believe Trump was in the 40s. DeSantis was still in the 30s. And now it's a complete blowout. I mean, the article is brutal. Marquette is another one. NBC is another one. They were all in that same category. Another one, let me give some more examples to make it. So Emerson College, another one that was Trump bullish at a time, May, June, early June, at a time when people didn't really have Trump yet soaring. It was that moment when I put up, you had the Alvin Bragg indictment coming and then came. And it was that moment when I put up the screenshot of what we were seeing in the interviews. I think it was a Friday night where Trump had actually hit 60%, even though he didn't make 60 for that poll. And hellfire came down by a bunch of people who were totally upset by it, but it was true. And then a couple of days later, after we put out our poll, maybe a week later, Emerson had him at 60 or 61, something like that. And DeSantis at like, I don't know what it was at that point, 16 or 17. I could go back and look, but Emerson was clearly in the bullish category. Now, here's the thing though. Tranche, you as a pollster can actually leave one tranche for another one. You can even fall right into the consensus without changing anything. When the rest of the field or the rest of the consensus or the polling universe catches up to you, then you can end up in the consensus without even doing anything. And that happened to us. A great example, we were Trump bear until, by the way, the consensus caught up to Trump bear. Then when they did, we moved to Trump bull. And then weeks later, the consensus caught up to that. But for a while, we were in a risky tranche. And it is more risky to be outside of the consensus even further than, like a bit. Most of the time, the bearish tranches are like not that far outside of the consensus. I picked some gross examples. But when you're in a bullish category, it's a much higher risk of being wrong because you're either wrong, you're just totally wrong, or you're ahead of the ball, you're ahead of the curve. And luckily this cycle, I think it's really clear there are a few of us who have been way ahead of the curve. By the way, you can look at that month again. Let me pop that back up. Who was roughly in this consensus area back then? And whoop, it goes back all the time. Who was roughly in this consensus area? Let's go back down. We were Trump plus 12 in this month. Okay, that we're looking at. Where's 3? You had some people wildly outside it, but look, there's Trafalgar. Quinnipiac did bump itself into roughly the consensus at this time, but it didn't quite get there because it still had DeSantis too high and Trump too low. But as the month went on, that is when it fell out of the consensus. So I know it's a little bit difficult to understand, but you know what? What did I do? Bull first, right? Yeah, so this is the bearish tranche. I'll try to explain this a little bit more. They provide favorable results to a candidate, although often it's softer. and support, or there is stronger support for those opponents. So, for instance, that Quinnipiac poll that I just pointed, this is when they moved to a Trump bearish. All right. Yes, they still favor Trump. They have Trump up by 14. However, the support levels are a little bit higher than some of the other pollsters for his opponents, and then a little bit softer for him. And then you can clearly see, but they were, you know what? It's not like they're wrong here. They were just a little late to the show. Now, why is Quinnipiac? I got a little bit to offer here, which I've been hard on Quinnipiac for many years. But after they really boffed 2020, and they didn't do so great in 22 either, but they didn't do horrible. There, I think what's happening is they're getting their footing. They started to go to companies like, and I just don't even mind saying them. They started going to companies like Lucid, like Dynata, and they started expanding their modes of collection. They're using certain survey designs for panels to put together diverse, demographically diverse panels. They're trying to reach people that traditional phone methods have not, the random digital dial. It's just not, they have not done well with it in the past. So at least they have changed. They have made efforts to change their methodology to get more accurate. And you have to credit them for it. And I think you can actually see the impact of that. They are clearly not as bad off of the consensus as they were in 2020. And I think a lot of people, the reason why, because I really have to say this. This is not the polling consensus we're seeing in the Republican nomination is not normal. Not for recent times, not in recent memory. Normally, we're all in our little tranches, folks, and the consensus rarely, the consensus rarely is this large of a group. There isn't, forget about equilibrium between the tranche. Like, they are lopsided as hell. There's media and university in one tranche that's super, super crowded. And then there's a few people who are outside the mainstream of that, outside the consensus. And the consensus didn't really prove to be very accurate because the tranches were so lopsided. All right. So, like I said, remember that these tranches don't just identify. Again, let me where is it? Let me pull this up. They don't just identify trends, they also identify bias. So when you're about to have a massive polling miss, we have noticed, and going back to 2014, that these groups will be extremely lopsided. All right. Maybe that's the case, that generally the large group predicted the outcome, but they didn't predict the size of the outcome. So you had these like out of the consensus dissonance, I guess, basically saying, no, that victory is not going to be that big. It's going to be closer than you think. And it would suggest that, but it was still nevertheless a polling miss. 2014 is a great example of that. Right? There were some, very few, but there were some that were giving us warning signs. 2016, I don't even have to get into it. Even 2020. 2020 in many ways was worse than 2016. That's the truth. 2018, they whitewashed how bad they did in the state level governors races and Senate races because they were generally right in the House vote, even though the consensus did overstate Democratic support across the country for House candidates. It overstated it, but they were generally close, so they whitewashed how bad they did. But nevertheless, we still saw a very, very lopsided distribution among the tranches. And then in 2022, there was a consensus in the House, but actually there was not really a consensus when you get beyond the House vote. So what proved to be more accurate? The House vote. It's not the pollsters' fault. They had Republicans up by a few points, 2-5, which is generally where people had them up, and they underperformed. They underperformed for myriad reasons we've talked about a million times, but the polls weren't wrong. They were actually really close in the House vote. And that showed us that there was going to be a low level of bias because there was a very clear consensus. And again, being in these, tranches, if it doesn't become like one tranche can become a consensus. I have to stress that so much. Right there from number one, it's bigger for a reason. Polls and polling tranches are dynamic. They go in and out of these different groups, but the parameters defining them are static. And each poll moves between the tranches, but they can become consensus. And hopefully the goal is the largest group is actually the consensus group. And it's not one side of the extreme or the other. And that hopefully indicates that it will be at least a more accurate election cycle. The House vote in 2022 is a really good example of that. All right. What else? I know I got to get to a commercial here, but let's see. What am I missing here before we go out? And I'll try to, you know what? I'll even open the floor to take questions to this if you guys have any questions, because it's I know it's confusing. And Laura was like, "Yeah, Rich, come on, you got to make this more." There really is no other way to put it, right? And if you know what, a bear economy is an economy that's like, less optimistic. It's slowing down, right? And a bull economy is much more optimistic, right? So, or market, really, not economy, but you know what I mean. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll actually try to grab some questions out of the queue and see if I can help explain this a little bit more. I know it's weird, but believe me, it's worked so far. And again, aggregate averages can just give you trends. They really can't identify bias. And unless you want to go to a certain website and have them unskew a poll for you that they just claim is correct, and then that isn't credible to me. I just don't. It's not a credible way to measure because polls can change. Quinnipiac could be a 10-point Democratic bias in 2020 and then having a 1-point Republican bias in 24. That absolutely could happen. So you can't get your expectations on past. You can't get hung up on how bad a pollster's performance may have been the prior cycle. Like, for instance, Santa, the New York Times, they didn't do bad in the individual races in 22. They did awful in 20. They did awful in 18, but they didn't do bad in 22. All right. So if you were to base how they did in a past election, you may have dismissed them. And yes, I always say, look at their track record, and it does matter. It does. But pollsters do try to change as time goes on. If they're persistently falling outside of the consensus, then it's probably a pretty good indication that they have not fixed their problem. Consensus can be wrong, but I don't want you to think about the consensus the way that everyone else is. Because like I said, you can be out of the mainstream, and a consensus a week later can catch up with you. All right. So that's what's happened. And by the way, think about that when you're thinking about the final days of an election, the polls in the final days of an election. Well, somebody could be ahead of the curve and be an outlier for that moment. But if you gave pollsters another week, maybe the other pollsters would have caught up. It's food for thought. All right, let's take a real quick break. And when we come back, we'll take some questions. So throw your questions in the queue. I'm not sure if Laura's even able to do it, but I'll just read through. Yeah, the Wall Street Journal polls, Derek. Actually, Derek, I'm going to take your question when we come back. All right, that's exactly what I'm going to do. It's not even really a question. It's more of a statement, but I am going to take it. All right, folks, look, we do have, obviously, we just unfortunately had a weather event in Florida. We had one hurricane. There is, hopefully, this thing will make a northern turn. There is a monster in the Atlantic right now, followed by Margot, who doesn't look like she's slouch either. But, are you prepared is the question here. And it's not just weather. It's the government, the incompetence, the economic risk that we've put ourselves into. All of this. Are you prepared in the event that something really happened to the power grid, whether it's incompetence from our leaders, economic decline, weather events, or, flat out terrorism? And this isn't, according to People's Pundit, Time Magazine just ran an article on this. They really are worried that that extremists are targeting the power grid. And if just a few key substations were to go down, folks, it could knock out power across the country for up to 18 months. Most people's lives, they're not ready. And most people's lives would be frozen in time the moment the power went out. That's why you need a solar generator. The Patriot Power Generator 2000X is portable, but it is powerful enough to power phones, your family's or yours, medical devices, even your refrigerator. You can get one now by going to 4patriots.com. Use the promo code TPP10 at checkout. Again, that's 4patriots.com. Use the promo code TPP10. This code is for your first purchase only, so make it count. And they have great deals right now for the Labor Day weekend. That some are extended. So go ahead and use it on something that's going to give you great savings. And I strongly suggest the generator. Right? Even we have a natural gas generator. We knew we needed a solar one. Again, 4patriots.com. Use the promo code TPP10 at checkout. They just got incredible deals they're running right now over at 4Patriots. Love that company. We don't sell anything we don't love. Simple as that. All right. First of all, Clifford, let's deal with this, and then I'll get to Drew on. Yeah, I mean, I think I pretty much do that. I hear what you're saying, Cliff. I do. I think I pretty much do that every day, but there is certainly, I could put the short and sweet on it because we've been through this, Cliff, a million times with these people. I remember in 15 and in 16, even when the polls weren't favorable to Trump, they showed that Trump was the weaker of the candidates. And again, major issues with polling. That's why I'm telling you his strength right now is very notable because he consistently is understated, not other Republicans, just Donald Trump. It isn't true that Republicans are consistently understated. They're consistently understated when Donald Trump's on the ballot. The only other election where they were generally understated was in 2014. In 2018, it was isolated, and it was because of Donald Trump literally there on the ground helping people get elected. Ron DeSantis is a great example. He would have lost that election if Trump did not come back like 3 times in the final 10 days. He would have lost that election. But the bottom line is, Cliff, I mean, we've gone over this a million times, whether it is Iowa, whether it is Wisconsin, whether it is Ohio. I'm going to ask people what I asked them all the time back in 2015 and 2016. Which battleground states in the Rust Belt do you intend to win? And how do you think that, DeSantis or Haley or anybody are going to carry those states? I mean, I'm literally waiting for an answer. Demographically, how do they intend to do it? There is a reason that they were not able to do it for 35, 40 years. Right? And by the way, Wisconsin's just a perfect example. Look at 1984 and look at 1988. All right? And now let's look at Trump and look at Romney. It's the same damn map. It's because there are so many similarities between the coalition that Donald Trump brings out and the coalition that Reagan brings out, only Trump's much less white. It's a little bit more dynamic. Yes, Reagan won in a big, big landslide. But, I mean, folks, the country was much, much whiter. The party ID was a lot less rigid. Reagan could win 20% of Democrats. I would argue now the country's so partisan, you're just seeing those registration changes in states like Pennsylvania. They're not calling, and Wisconsin doesn't have partisan, so all we can rely on is the self-ID. They aren't telling exit polls, I voted for Donald Trump, but I'm a Democrat. If they're voting for Donald Trump, they're calling themselves a Republican or an independent to the exit pollster. Yet, when Trump's not on the ballot, and it's Kelly, for instance, or even Johnson. With Johnson, you could very clearly see that it's very similar to Trump. But when you're looking at like Kelly or Mitt Romney, these people are either calling themselves Democrats again, or they're calling themselves independents as well. But they're not calling themselves, or they're not identifying at all with the Republican Party unless Donald Trump's on the ballot. Pennsylvania, by the way, very same thing. Registration took time. They're registering. but it took time. You could see them catching up. Democrats in 16, I think about 14% or 12% said they voted for Donald Trump. But by the time it was 2018, those people just didn't vote. A lot of them didn't vote. And then when we got to 2020, you could see massive registration changes, and there wasn't that same crossover anymore. Right, so things were a lot different back then in that era, Reagan. Let's see. What else we got here? Where is Derek's comment? Derek, I lost you here. The Wall Street Journal polls have historically been anti-Trump. And I would rephrase that, Derek, and I would say Wall Street Journal polling absolutely has historically understated Donald Trump's support. And it's noteworthy that if you have Cornel West in the race, Trump is up by 1, 40-39, and West gets a chunk. But even when you, hiccups. Even when you take, oh crap, I may have to hold my breath for 30 seconds. Even when you take West out of the race, it's tie ball game. But what was it, 47? Something like that, 48? That is not normal. It wasn't in 16. It wasn't in 20. And yeah, they changed their pollster, but you could clearly see, I think they pegged it. We had Trump up by 1 point, and I can pull this up. Where are you? I just had it here. I got to put this up as a press release, by the way. I just never did. I gave it to you guys and didn't put it up as a press release format. Trying to make it easier for people too, because I get emails like, hey, where can I find the poll? Like if I just did it, then they would easily be able to see it. So when it's Biden versus Trump, we also still had it low, unlike them. But I know what they did. They certainly tightened the screen. That's what they did. And if you did, it probably would give Biden some of the someone else's, and then they'd probably have it tied at 47, 48. But with West in the race, very clear little lead for Trump. Trump's support actually goes up. This is now, I know other pollsters are finding something different, but this is now the fourth poll, I believe, that we've done that with Cornel West in the race, Trump actually goes up. And not just national polls. I'm talking about states in the states. Florida was another public one that we just released where Trump's support increased by a point with Cornel West on the ballot. But again, we are also dealing with people who are writing in, who are undecided, so it may be, well, no, here in this one we didn't. Only in Florida we did. And of course, with DeSantis, you notice, by the way, because I'm getting attacked by all these DeSantis supporters, and I'm sorry that you're in a meltdown mode, showing DeSantis getting crushed by Biden. You notice that nobody else is releasing the other hypothetical. Why is that? Why all of a sudden is there an embargo on polling Ron DeSantis against Joe Biden in a hypothetical election? Why are we not doing that anymore? Doesn't anybody find that remotely funny or suspicious? I'll tell you why. Because the few of us who are. Premise is doing it. Morning Consult is doing it. We're doing it. Emerson did it in somewhat Mitchell Research. I really think it started with the Mitchell Research poll in Michigan, where Trump and Biden were like tied and DeSantis was getting blown out by 13 points. I think the narrative got away from them, and there were just too many polls that were done. So, that's Alan West is still out there, True Climber. That's a good question. What happened to Alan West political? I don't know what he's going to do, but I can tell you that, he's out there. He's talking to people. I'm trying to look across all these different platforms. Yeah, without Laura, I'll try not to forget to say deuces. Yeah, one thing so far that makes sense. Some polls are paid by PACs and candidates. They give the numbers they're paid to give. Yeah, I mean, what happened in this? I mean, that's a great example because you have, let's see if they're even here. I don't know if they're in the national poll, but I know that they were putting out a lot of state polls. Yeah, I'm looking. Harvard, Harris, by the way, good point. That's a great example of a Trump bullish poll. All right. However, when everybody flipped their noggin last month, when they came out with their last one was, where are you? Wow, so many polls. So many polls. Their last one was, where in the hell are they? Have there really been this many polls since Harvard released their last poll? Trump plus 40 in July. I thought they had one for August, or is it now? They haven't done it. It's coming out. But for instance, Trump plus 40, DeSantis at only 12%, and Vivek at 10%. They were ahead there. So while Harvard Harris have been in the Trump bullish tranche for most of the cycle, it is also true that that tranche keeps catching up to the consensus. And they are so, people can trash them. And DeSantis people have been publicly trashing Mark Penn and Harvard. You can trash them all they want, but the numbers are the numbers, folks. I mean, people are, even for crying out loud, even the Wall Street Journal poll now has Trump at 59 and DeSantis at 13. Trump plus 46. So Harvard told you what the Wall Street Journal told you on Friday. Harvard told you last month was the trend. And if they come out this month and it's like Trump plus 70, then I would say it's really, that's whack and that's way outside of it. But I don't think that's going to happen. They've actually backed off their support for Trump a little bit. He hit a high of, it was 59 or 60 in the Harvard Harris poll, and he backed off a little bit back into the 50s, as we did, by the way. Our high for Trump was 61. Then he, what was the last one? 55? I just have it up actually right now. Let's find out. I want to say it's 55. So he backed, oh no, it's 56. So, I mean, he's backed off a little bit, but the last poll was 58 or 59. So technically you're in the sampling era of those changes to trend over time. I think our trend supports that Trump fell maybe 2 points, 3 points, really, that you could really solidly say, yeah, I believe that. But the big deal is that Ron DeSantis lost a third of his support, or 2/3, excuse me, 2/3 of his support, and that is real. There is movement in the states for Nikki Haley. We only had her at 3%, even though it was a post-debate poll. We only had her at 3%. But I can see in the states, for instance, in Florida, she started to pick up steam a little bit at the last minute. So I do think that there is real momentum for Nikki Haley. I just don't. I'm remiss to say momentum or surge. It's like Ramaswamy doubled his support, more than doubled his support. So I'm like, yeah, I guess like the surge in quotes is real, but that a real surge is like I went from 0 to the leading candidate at 35, 40%. That like what Donald Trump did in 2015 and 16. That's a surge. A surge would be God, what's another good example of a surge, folks? Barack Obama in Iowa in 2008. Yeah, sorry, this guy's outside doing work in case you hear that. Going from 2 to 6% or, 6 to 8% is not really a surge in my book. It's just not. I don't know. That's a blip. I mean, that's sampling error movement. Ramaswamy's rise in our poll was outside of the sampling error. So, I consider that. So let's see. Okay, here's another great example. This is recent too, because I really want you guys to get this concept. I really do. Because you could start doing it yourselves, and you can start to see, again, not only a trend, but a persistent bias in someone's poll. There's times when they're just, it's a temporary position where they are, but other times you'll see that it's persistent. So, for instance, with Marquette University, it's persistent. All right, there. Monmouth, by the way, is another great example. DeSantis bearish, DeSantis bullish, and they're persistently favoring or outside the consensus. Insider advantage, Matt. A lot of people know Matt. They know he does his job honestly. He had some pretty big misses in 22, but everybody does. We all take our fair share of lumps. But generally speaking, has been more right than wrong, and has been more right, especially in recent elections, than the rest of these people, most of the rest of these people you see in this list. However, his latest poll had Trump at only 45 and had DeSantis still at 18%. Again, Trump plus 27 persistently. Well, I mean, that's not true. I was looking at CNN and it got in my head. I'll get there in a second. But this is without a doubt Trump bearish. It still gives Trump a more favorable outcome as far as the margin, but his support level is lower while his opponent is higher. All right, so it really is only CNN and Matt that are keeping DeSantis at the above 14%. CNN again, they did it again. Persistently now they've moved into Trump bearish territory, I would say. But again, they are dragging their feet to do it. They don't want, I don't know how else to put this. I don't know how on earth you could still find DeSantis' support at 18%. Sorry, Matt. And by the way, look, Matt's poll was conducted over a single day. You know how my feelings are about that. I don't like that. A single day can give statistical noise. I don't like it. But the CNN poll was conducted over the same period the Wall Street Journal poll was. Yet they have Trump's lead a full 12 points less and DeSantis 5 points higher and Trump 7 points lower. That is suspect to me. After, let's find more CNNs and you'll see. Here we go. Trump plus 21. They have DeSantis still strongly in the 20s, just below 30. And Trump below 50 in the mid 40s with a 21-point lead when everybody else has clearly got Trump. And the average at this time is like Trump plus 35. So CNN has consistently displayed a bias. All right. Even when they had Trump at 53, they are one of only two polls, along with another DeSantis favorable poll, that shows, or not favorable, but more favorable. Okay. Because I really should say this, it's all relative. Obviously. Right. It's always going to be relative. And the standard changes as the consensus changes. You're always measuring it against the consensus. And so, poll that was just conducted a couple of days before, the Harvard-Harris poll, which has been a canary in the coal mine, right? They have been right there. Honestly, they have been right there with us. They have been a canary in the coal mine. Despite all the crap some people want to talk about them, they have led trends. They are not lagging trends. They are leading indicators so far, not a lagging one. And by the way, they come out a few days after us. So it has been one after the other. Each month we do this, where we have to hear people bitch and moan for 2 days, 3 days. And then the next thing you know, it pops up and boom. As a matter of fact, I think I got something. I do, don't I? I still do. Oh, tell me I didn't get rid of this clip. Come on. You got rid of that clip, Rich? Nope, I didn't. Here we go. Remember this? Hold on 1 second. Hold on. How about that? Listen, they're making me like a nasty person, Daniel. I'm truly a really likable guy. It's just, I've been through attacks from Obama's people. I've been through attacks, but Obama's people weren't dirty. Like, there are places that they were never willing to go because, frankly, you're a piece of for going there. You know what I mean? Like, you're not hurting me. You're just making yourself look like a self-righteous piece of trash. Remember that? That was the moment they came out and mirrored our poll that we were being beaten up for over a 48-hour period. And then everybody followed along. I mean, everyone at least followed the trend. That is that poll right there. That's what made me think about it. That is that poll. This is when this happened. All right. So, and then you have others. I mean, very clearly. Look at Rasmussen there with 62.17. So CNN again, this has done a very good job of showing you that CNN has been persistently more favorable to Ron DeSantis than the rest of the polling universe. All right, you're going to have some that are, you know, just a little bit favorable, some that are just a lot more favorable to one candidate or another. And they have not only been persistently and significantly, that's the key, more favorable to Ron DeSantis than other polls, but they have lagged the trend considerably. So anytime I see that happening, it shoots in my mind, it shoots off a flag, and not even in my mind. This is how we identify whether at best a pollster is lagging, and at worst, they're just full of shit. And in the case of CNN, folks, I've read emails from people at CNN who are supposed to be impartial political editors and polling editors. I've heard audio tapes of people being taped talking about their own polling results. I've heard them talking about spiking the coverage of polls because they didn't like how favorable it was to Trump. I've heard them mocking Hispanic voters for their support for Trump, trashing Cuban voters in Florida because of their support for Trump. These are people who decide these things. Like, what questions are we going to ask? How the poll's going to be reported? And they're the ones who are basically the liaison to the pollster themselves. So I've heard enough out of CNN to know they cannot be trusted, to be honest. You just can't. They have no objectivity, and their goal is not to give people the most accurate result they can give them. The goal is to give them the result they want to give them. Remember Gillum plus 13 or 12 or some shit like that? Do you remember that? And just as like cherry on top, that they were being deceptive on purpose. It was intentional deception. They put out a poll a couple of days later, right before the election, that got no coverage, was in the form of a simple PDF that nobody put up there. It was actually retroactively added to the Real Clear Politics average because nobody saw it come out. They did it for posterity. It was a few days later. It went from Gillum plus 12 to like Gillum plus 2. It was a cover your butt deception. They knew Gillum wasn't ahead by 12 points. Even at his biggest lead we ever had for Andrew Gillum, it was 4 points in April, the spring of 2018. They did that on purpose. They gave the Gillum plus 12 wall-to-wall coverage for probably 72 hours. It was constant talk about this poll. Yet, the one they snuck out the back door, nobody covered. It got basically a blog mention, and it wasn't part of their news at all. The headline should have been, "Wow, the race is tight in 10 points. Is Gillum at risk of losing this thing, letting it get away from him? He was just ahead by 12, according to our other poll." You never heard any of that. So to me, CNN is firmly in the dishonest category, untrustworthy category, dubious category, deceptive category, whatever you want to call it. Now, folks at RCP have no choice but to aggregate them because they're CNN. Just like they can't take out, like they can't have there's no repercussions to ABC News and Langer Research for coming out with a Biden plus 17 in Wisconsin. They're institutions. They're protected. They can miss by 17 points in the state of Wisconsin and be all right. I missed by a few points in Pennsylvania, and they come at you like crazy. Pennsylvania really pisses me off. Arizona doesn't, because I know what happened in Arizona. Now that we're allowed to say these things on, although I guess I risk an indictment, I'm on record anyway, so it's too damn late. Kari Lake absolutely would have won that election if they didn't rig the shit out of it. So I'm not too concerned about that. Blake he was outside that. Blake Masters, he was outside that. But okay. So hopefully you guys get it. Let's go over it one more time real quick. Hopefully you guys get it. I kind of want to try to drill this into your heads a little bit. All right. Remember, first things first, polls and polling tranches are dynamic, but the parameters that define those tranches are static. And that's simply laid out in the other two slides. The second thing is pollsters, they move between them. They are measured against the consensus, and that's how we determine which tranche they end up in. And we do this because tranches ID both trends and bias. I'm not post-mortem going through a pollster's record and then adjusting later in the next election cycle for how much I think he over or underestimated a party or a candidate or whatever. The fact is, different candidates from different parties can be stronger than other candidates. So, if they underestimated a Republican candidate in Georgia one year, I can't just think that they're going to do it again with a totally different candidate. Is it worth noting that if they consistently understate someone's support or a party's support? Of course it is. And when we showed you that, especially in Senate elections and House vote, that matters because Senate elections have more partisan, it's a more rigid partisan voting index. And yes, candidate quality matters, but for the most part, ticket splitting is a rare commodity these days. It doesn't happen as much as it did 20 years ago. It just doesn't. The era of Obama almost eliminated completely ticket splitting. And people want to blame Trump for constant, division and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is that division on numerous indicators started under Obama. The lack of ticket splitting, almost full-blown erasing of ticket splitting across the nation. Another great indicator was the survey of consumers. The whole country thinks the economy sucks. And Democrats are just telling the University of Michigan that everything's great. They know it's not great. And then later, by the way, under Trump, they did it in the survey of consumers. Everybody knew the economy was rocking and rolling, yet Democrats consistently reported negative sentiment toward the economy, not because the economy was doing bad for them. It wasn't. It was because Donald Trump was the president and their partisans. Partisanship was polluting financial data collection. That's tragic, but that's just true. So instead of doing it the way others have done it, we have always said that you can actually try to monitor bias in real time. And then you take that into account with how that pollster has performed in the past. All right. Getting back to specifics here. A bullish tranche is one that is favorable. So let's call it a Trump bullish tranche, right? Favorable results to Trump, often even stronger, and weaker support for opponents than the consensus, all right? Because that's what it's measured against. And the Harvard-Harris poll is a great example of a Trump bullish poll. Morning Consult, by the way, now is a Trump bullish. It wasn't. It's moved into Trump bullish, and then then that really became the consensus. Now, because it's pulled back a little bit in some polls, you have Harvard, and I don't know what the latest Harvard-Harris poll is. I'd have to go and look. Does anybody know if there's been a poll since July? If they have, that'd be great if you could throw it in there, and I'll check it out. But I'm just not seeing it here unless my eyes are playing tricks on me. Here's the latest Harvard-Harris poll I've seen. And they show Trump pulling back, like I said. This is the Harris X, but it was done for the Messenger, and it has Trump back at 59-14. That's just not associated with Harvard, though. It is a different poll. But nevertheless, Harvard-Harris is a great example, but they have been, it's not that they're out, they're wrong. They have actually shown that they have been the canary in the coal mine, and rest of the polling universe catches up to them. So it moves them out. It forces them out of the Trump bullish tranche for temporarily and puts them into the consensus. Emerson College was a Trump bullish for a while. I think I showed you that before, but Emerson had Trump at, They're one of the few. There, CBS News had it too, though. So, but still, I think Emerson had it first. I went over the yes. So in April, the end of April, Emerson had Trump at 62, DeSantis at 16, Trump plus 46. The rest of the field largely had DeSantis around 20 still, and Trump was in the 50s. That was his consensus, his average. And now, they've pulled back a little bit too, but I would still not take them at they're Trump bearish at this point. Still favorable to Trump, but I think their last one they did probably overestimated some of his opponents. There could have been a glip, however. Oh no, that's right. They did come out with in August. No, they are flatly in the consensus at this point. Emerson is really right in the consensus. Like us, though, we are, us more in consult. Emerson, and is there anybody else here? I don't want to miss anybody. Fox News have Ramaswamy a little bit higher than he is in the consensus, but it could be temporarily. I just want to bring this up. We did say Ramaswamy needed to make inroads with some other voters in order to continue, not only continue his rise if he wanted to, but in order to maintain the support level he had, he would need to really cut into other groups, because you're going to have people change their minds and move from different candidates. And I think Nikki Haley's getting some of that, from Ron DeSantis and some from Mike Pence. But you got to remember, almost all of Ron DeSantis' supporters would vote for Donald Trump. So as DeSantis has collapsed in many of these polls, you can very clearly see a lot of that did go to Donald Trump. This is a major flaw, and we'll get into this in a second, but it's a major flaw with Team DeSantis' argument that they've been making. Got to get him one-on-one. Got to get him one-on-one. That is not even true anymore. He's going to win Iowa, then he's going to win New Hampshire. He's going to consolidate the field. There's going to only be, I just heard Governor Sununu. He just said this again yesterday. If all these people get out, then I think DeSantis can carry New Hampshire. Poll just came out today. Trump is just under a majority in first choice. Second choice, he's over it. Even in Iowa, DeSantis' own pollsters show, head-to-head, he cannot beat Trump. He can't. In Iowa, it's actually probably best if DeSantis has a crowded field and just does better. But you know what? Again, let's keep to this for a second. In the bearish, favorable results still for that candidate, however, often softer. Quinnipiac now is a great example of a Trump bearish tranche. And they have stronger support for opponents than most. And of course, measured against the consensus, right? So is that right? Quinnipiac or did they basically? No, it's still a great example. They have DeSantis almost at 20%, although Trump is 57. So again, it does not require to be in the bearish tranche. It doesn't require that poll have less support than the consensus. And in fact, right now, that's a little bit more the consensus. What really matters is this persistent, stronger support among their opponent, which is going to obviously result in a slimmer. It's so ridiculous looking at these numbers, talking like this, which will result in a smaller margin. And I have such a hard time talking about this with any level of seriousness, folks. I really do, because the fact of the matter is, Tony's right. Ed Rollins, who wanted DeSantis to win and lied to all of you when I told you he was out there putting together, the ground for laying the groundwork for DeSantis to run. Like, they were already doing focus groups and polling and doing, certain infrastructure moves when I told you he was running for president, and they ran the media outlets and lied and denied what I said. Now Ed Rollins is openly saying that, you know what, I can probably find that. I think that's probably worth reading. There was one other thing I did want to go over with you guys, but yeah, if you still have questions, throw them in there and I'll grab them and I'll try to answer them. Yeah. Yeah, I unsubscribed to Town Hall too. I just, it's not even because I don't care if they support DeSantis. You have to have some kind of, you got to give both. That's why I pay for Real Clear Politics. I pay premium on Real Clear Politics because they make an effort. They make an effort. Here's the right side of it. Here's the left side of it. And not just the right and left side of it. Here's the Biden side. Here's how the Biden, Team Biden considers this. And then they'll bring up something, from, well, there's a very single minority. There's only one elected Democrat who doesn't want Biden to run publicly. But they'll even give that side. They'll give the Trump side on if they can. And I know they're doing their best to ID it. Tell you, the founder's a bright guy, really bright guy. He knows that. I think he's got a great nose for handicapping political wins. All right, and so he made bottom line. Yeah, the CNN poll just came out, but again, that's a 5-point increase for Trump and an 8-point decrease for DeSantis, Derek. But from June, but SSRS consistently overstates opponent support, mainly in this poll, is Ron DeSantis, and is now, if you consider the Wall Street Journal and you consider Morning Consult, which has been tracking it all the time, you consider the Messenger, which has been tracking it all the time, they're all very clearly moving to the high 50s for Trump. Hell, one of them was 61. The New York Post was 61 just a few days ago. So they're consistently, it's ridiculous. But that's why we do this, because that really and I was thinking at one point, wouldn't it be great if we did like a weekly thing where I put up who is in what tranche, right? Why did I come up with this name too? For those of you who are financial people, you'll understand where I'm coming from. What are usually used to describe like tranches, right? What do people in the financial sector, what are they referring to when they're talking about slices of groups and stuff like bonds, right? And then later, CDOs, stuff like that, right? So that's crap it's not all crap. What I'm saying is the crap that they kept rating triple B, double A, even. And by the way, it didn't matter if it's triple A, if it was in the same tranche as the rest of the garbage subprimes. It just really didn't even matter. They were all garbage. But I guess I had that left in my mind from that time period. And I'm thinking about, there really are AAA polls. There are AA polls. There's A-rated polls. And I don't mean grades like 538 stock. It's garbage. There are, high credit, meaning high credibility in my mind. And it's low risk to believe them. And then there are low credibility, which is extremely high risk to believe. So I guess I always saw that similarity. And that's why I use that pretty much for an analogy, I think they are analogous. So in my mind, I made it out like that. Plus, batches doesn't sound as cool. Batches, right? Groups, that's real interesting, right? So in my mind, that's how I think about it. That some are just more credible, some are more trustworthy than others. Man, I'll tell you what. This stuff looks bad. Tree Climber, this is a family that told us if we took the damn shot, you couldn't get sick. They look so stupid. They look so stupid. Why does the RCP average seem to favor Biden over Trump? I don't think it does at this point. It's just what can happen with the RCP average is one real bad poll can throw the whole thing off. Look at what happened with Wisconsin in 2020, Florida, barely a Trump edge. Why? Because it's a shitty New York Times poll that was from a month before or weeks before was skewing the average 6 points more in favor of Biden when we all knew he had zero chance to carry the state of Florida. I mean, it's a really good question. They don't want to drop certain polls out of the average just based on time. They like to have a mix of, and I get that. It's just that I have seen, that could be part of it, could absolutely be um, that they just didn't have time to put them in. But I've absolutely seen polls added after the fact to make the average, you know, closer. Um, but trust me, as somebody who, runs sites as well, sometimes you just don't have the time to put it all up there. I have numerous, again, I'm going to do it right now. We released a national poll last week, right? I haven't had a chance to put a damn press release up. I just had, so far, only thing we did do was I don't know why it's not working. The only thing we did do um was Florida, right? Let me see if I can find that one that I was talking about. Yeah, Ken Paxton's impeachment trial begins today. Tomorrow we're going to talk a lot more about that, even though I'm going to stick to obviously polling, but I do want to talk more about that because there's a lot going on behind the scenes that people aren't telling you about, guys. All right. There is a war inside the Republican Party, and it's becoming, how could I put this? It's going to get ugly. It's going to get ugly. And Ken Paxton is being targeted for removal because the Bushes could not beat him in an election. They don't want him there to defend Donald Trump. They don't want him there to engage in lawfare. Listen, there's a part of the Republican Party that's working with Democrats right now, and they think they're going to be safe if they go along with this. And they want to go along with it because they hate Donald Trump. They're so stupid they don't see that Democrats are actually using them to achieve one party rule. Because these people are so corrupt and so disgusting, they would rather not even sit at the table. They would rather eat the crumbs off the floor that Democrats knock off while they're gorging themselves than have a seat at the table if it means Trump is also at that table. They're disgusting. And it's not even a matter of vote. It's, for me, it's not a matter of who I support or I don't support. I side with the voters, and they're wrecking everything to stop the will of the majority in their own party. And the only person who has won a presidential election in the modern era for the Republican Party. Because they're corrupt, Laura. They're totally corrupt. War is a big part of it. For the Bush family, of course, it's about who's going to run Texas. Because remember, Ken Paxton has got a lot of friends, that are MAGA, and they're really afraid MAGA's going to take total control of Texas. Which, by the way, I mean, if you just allow elections, they are going to take control of Texas, and waiting for them to, take the governor's mansion. They're terrified of, but they're also worried. There's things with Ken Paxton. They can't have him. They cannot have a warrior like him around who is not afraid to take these people on. I don't want to go too much. I mean, it's 122 already, and this was supposed to be a shorter episode. By the way, I got Charlie Kirk after the show. 2:30, right, Laura? 2:30. Um, it goes so far beyond Kemp, but also in Georgia, he's totally in on it, completely in. There's going to be a lot of information that's coming out, but war is a big part of this. A lot of these people, the Great Grift, folks, the great grift. They, and George Soros just made a comment about this the other day, are absolutely terrified that Donald Trump's going to come in and turn off the spigot. They are. There's so many real serious reasons that that they oppose Donald Trump that are beyond normal reasons. And I don't think the country not the country. They don't understand that this is going to eventually end up and turn on them. There's like very old adage, I mean, it's really from a poem, and then there was no one to speak for me. These idiots seem to think that they're going to be rewarded for being collaborators. Were the Nazi collaborators awarded? I mean, were they? That's right. So exactly. They were lined up and shot. I think it's this clip. I kind of want to, yeah, that's not it. I'm looking for something else. I don't care about what he said about that. There is one moment that I really think is relevant to that person's question. And there it is. Because I absolutely think he's telling the truth. And not even telling the truth. I think he's right. I don't think it's a matter of telling the truth. I think it's a matter of people understanding what effing time it is in this country right now. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We'll go over this video real quick, and then we'll come back and we'll read the article that I wanted to read. But I think it's important we share this video first. The media lost their minds over this comment, which was made with a bunch of other comments. I mean, it was just Tucker uncensored. He went ballistic. He went totally ballistic and just said everything he wanted to say. Everything from Sinclair's allegations that he slept with Obama and smoked crack with him and snorted coke with him, which, by the way, can we get real? Of course, Obama snorted coke and smoked crack. And then he made himself, he admitted that he had, he was jealous of Donald Trump because Donald Trump was an A personality and that he had fantasies with men. This is true. So come on. But anyway, they lost their minds. And I kind of wish Tucker would have said this separately than the rest of this interview, because they used it to dismiss what he was saying here. And I do think that we're in this point in our country. I do. And I think if you don't think that we are, you got to wake up. You're living in another reality. We are the killer of kings in this country. We've done it before.
What do you think the future holds? Is it?
I don't know.
I mean, are they going to let Trump be president?
No, of course. I mean, look, if, they protested him, they called him names. He won anyway. They impeached him twice on ridiculous pretenses. They fabricated a lot about what happened on January 6th in order to impeach him again. It didn't work. He came back. Then they indicted him. It didn't work. He became more popular. Then they indicted him 3 more times. And every single time his popularity rose. So if you begin with criticism, then you go to protest, then you go to impeachment, now you go to indictment, and none of them work, what's next? I mean, graph it out, man. We're speeding toward assassination, obviously. And no one will say that, but I don't know how you can reach that conclusion.
I've said it. I've said it. Graph it out. He's absolutely right. Graph it out. What a great way to put it. I know. You know how many times the average folk on a poll, once a poll, at least we hear something about a voter saying they're worried that eventually they're just going to try to kill Donald Trump or kill him. We hear this every damn poll, right, Laura? Every poll. Every single one. At least one, if not multiple times. Yeah, I'm going to vote for him, but I got to tell you, I'm really concerned. I think they're going to wind up killing this guy. And it's so sad that it's said so nonchalant. You're right. It's a matter of fact, Laura. And it's like, that's why I actually was listening to one the other day when I tweeted our quote tweet for that dude who runs town hall. They were just talking about that in the chat in both locals and on YouTube. He goes on and on. He writes 10 paragraphs about why you should, on Twitter. He writes 10 paragraphs about why the Republicans are falling into a trap. Trump's going to have a conviction. He can never win with a felony, this, that, and the other thing, and all this stuff, on and on and on. And what he seems to miss is, if you don't stand and fight against something like this, they're going to do it to everybody. Mr. Genius, understand they already have an indictment relating to Martha's Vineyard, the migrants being moved to Martha's Vineyard, drawn up. That is a done deal. They are already joking about it in liberal political circles. If he ever really became a problem, because they don't view him as a problem right now, they don't. Only like DeSantis's most ardent supporters actually believe Ron DeSantis can win an election. As the polls show, most Republicans do not. Democrats do not. The only Democrat who's ever said anything like that is the one and only Democrat, Phillips in Minnesota, who wants Joe Biden to step down. The polls don't back it up. Forget about the top line to the polls. The demographics inside the numbers don't back it up. The empirical turnout data don't back it up. But they believe me. In the event that changed, and he actually turned on the deep state, which nobody in those circles believe he will. Why? Because he is sitting on the sidelines, allowing them to target his political opponent so he can win a nomination. By default. By default. It's good to know Democrats. Like, I like talking to everyone. I like knowing what everyone is thinking, not just what your one side is thinking. That's called a bubble. And the right has bubbles too, believe me. And some of those supporters are in a bubble right now, where they just can't hear anything. They're in a massive state of denial, and they're willing to compromise every principle they have in order to get the end outcome they want. Sounds like a Democrat. If you let them do this to Donald Trump, they're going to do it to everybody. And no amount of words on Twitter or an article, no quasi or like pseudo intellectual, they're trying to sound like the intelligentsia laying out these arguments, and it falls so flat because it's so disingenuous, because you just can't get back. You can't get around the very sound logic that none of that matters, because they will do it to everyone and everybody. What you're really saying is you're willing to go back to being fake Republicans during the Bush era, that you really don't care about the advancement of the agenda that you say you believe in and you run on. Because when the times get hard, you cave like a bitch. And actually, that's not even fair. You cave like a coward. Because I got to tell you, American women in many circles in this country are holding stronger and firmer than many men. That's the truth, Laura, and you know it. Who fueled, when these indictments came down, who fueled Donald Trump's surge? We've been over this a million times. Men are late to the party now. Now they've consolidated behind Donald Trump, but that's not who fueled the surge. Republican and independent women did. I find that to be extremely interesting. Republican men, especially credentialed men, folded like an omelet. They may be back now. And I'm, of course, not talking about everybody. I'm talking about margins, because I'm a pollster and that's what I do. Let's do this before we go to listen to Ed Rollins, what he has to say.
You know what I mean? Like, they have decided, permanent Washington, both parties have decided that there's something about Trump that's so threatening to them, they just can't have him. I mean, they're putting him on trial in March of next year in the J6 case, which basically consists of trying to send him to prison for the rest of his life for complaining about the last election. That's literally what it is. Again, if this were happening in Moldova, the State Department would issue an all-hands-on-deck order to let the world know this is not a legitimate government.
How many times have you heard me say that, by the way? He's totally right. And now we put our political prisoners in jail. We have no moral authority at all. We do not run elections that the country has faith in. So we have no moral authority to drop press releases from the State Department calling Putin's re-elections or elections in Eastern, Ukraine, lacking credibility. We have no moral authority to do that anymore. And by the way, we lost. Zelensky's been locking up his opponents for years. Nobody's saying anything. That's our champion.
And yet our government is doing it. It's like it's really hard to overstate how bad this is. And yeah. I don't know where it's going, but there's a collision that's clearly imminent. And by the way, the president is senile in a way that's impossible to deny. Biden's not running the government.
No.
So like, I don't know. I've never been this worried about anything as I am about where this is going.
That's a powerful statement, but I got to tell you, it's one I agree with. I've never been this worried either. This stuff doesn't happen in this country. We're the first generations to witness this on this kind of level. We have a administrative state that doesn't believe in the presidency anymore or voter sovereignty. If Robert Barnes made perhaps one of the most coherent arguments about why the impeachment was supposed to be the standard for making a president ineligible to run, because first of all, there was no Justice Department. Second of all, the founders would have been horrified that federal prosecutors would essentially have the power to subvert the presidency, which is the people's voice in the executive branch. He was the boss, end of story, that's it. And they do not have authority over the voters or the president. And that is what this election is about. The administrative state no longer wants credible, meaningful elections for the sovereign in this country anymore. And if they get it, that's what, again, these people who, missed the town hall, that's what they don't get. You submit. Doesn't matter whether you support Donald Trump or not. I'm not trying to, this isn't a pitch for Donald Trump. It is a pitch for the way the majority feels, however, because I tend to try to speak for people who are the majority and yet somehow end up with the lowest voice in the national discussion. So without a doubt, that is how they feel. Great questions here by Exactly. If Trump was taken out for some reason, do you believe Vivek with a Trump endorsement could win the type of landslide that he says he is the only one who could produce it? I think you answered your own question in the next one. I just want to read it and then I'll add to it. I mean, does he even have the appeal to get a coalition large enough to create a landslide anyways? I tend to think there is too much polarization. Exactly. In truth, there can be an electoral college landslide in this country, but it would not be this kind of like Reagan or Lyndon Johnson or Richard Nixon kind of landslide. I at this point, still, I'm not saying it can never happen again. I'm just saying that right now, let's face it, folks. I mean, there are political people out there who are so political. They want their opposition in jail. They want them hurt physically. They want their families destroyed. I mean, I was watching people celebrate that disgusting sentence of 17 years for a nonviolent offense. And you were watching people like the Krakenhead brothers, celebrating it, talking about, they were convicted by a jury of their peers. I think the Emerson College poll that came out this morning shows you very clearly they were not convicted by a jury of their peers. The jury pool in DC is a jury of nobody's peers, except for the Democratic Party and the administrative state. They are not at all able to render a verdict that is a just and verdict based on the facts. This is a deeply, deeply corrupted jurisdiction with a bunch of ideologically possessed and dependent people. And I don't mean dependent like, Republicans tend to talk about the poor in this country who need food stamps and stuff like that. No, I'm talking about people who owe their entire careers, of which they're making a lot of money, to a crooked administrative state, a crooked deep state. And there is no chance. By the way, the only reason why Emerson got a far less percentage than we got, but not guilty, or with guilty, excuse me, is because they allowed people to say unsure. When we are trying to elicit true beliefs or true, how can I put this? We're trying to basically coax out of them what their true feelings are about something that they know. Because I hate to say this, but often, especially in jurisdictions like that, the facts of the case don't matter. It's their predetermined or the presuppositions that they have about guilt or innocence. And then it's like very incredibly difficult for a defendant to overcome that. We don't allow them to say unsure. We make them choose. And when we did, we got 90+%. However, there is good news for Donald Trump in that poll. It's just not great news. Our not guilty percentage was 3.8%. That was done earlier this year. They found 8%. So it is at least somewhat possible that some people, when we did it, there were still a lot of myths about January 6th that we now know are fake. They're not true. They're not real. Officers were killed. They barnstormed the Capitol. We know this is not true now. Stuff like this. They let them in, which we already always knew, but it's like the public knows now. By the way, the broken promise to release the January 6th footage is one of the dirtiest, slimy politician things I've ever seen a politician do. Kevin McCarthy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, you all lied to people. You lied to people. Julie Kelly, good for you for calling them out. They're disgusting. And they're doing it because, again, I don't care what she says publicly. She is serving a man who is trying to subvert Donald Trump. Kevin McCarthy does not support Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has done everything to support him and also to try to avoid a fight like he had with Paul Ryan during the nomination. And what does he get in return? Kevin McCarthy takes his Rolodex out, gives it to Dean DeSantis, gives his donors who never donate to anybody without his okay, his green light, his blessing to go ahead and fund Ron DeSantis' campaign, to do everything in their power to try to change the rules using the committee to change the rules to help Ron DeSantis in California in the primary, on and on and on and on. Now, January 6th, releasing that footage, not only they sacrificed those people, folks. Do you understand what they did? Kevin McCarthy could have released that footage a while ago. 3 hours tops for a defense lawyer who may have to drive clear across the country to get that footage. They sacrificed the lives and the freedoms of people, everyday people, all in the effort to establish a precedent that is a novel theory and law that they can use as precedent to get Donald Trump. And Kevin McCarthy is, of course, in on it. Of course he is. I mean, you'd have to be a fool not to believe that. It's disgusting. It's totally disgusting. The Republican Party wonders why these normies that we talk about in Iowa and Ohio and apparently even Florida, they wonder why they can't get their vote. And only Donald Trump gets their vote. Do we really have to? Is it really that hard to understand? These are disgusting people who promised you something. They didn't deliver, and now people are going to jail for obscene amounts of time for nonviolent crimes simply because they want Donald Trump off the ballot. And they want to put you in your place. And I don't know how you can respect anything like that. You know, I mean, and they never, by the way, Kevin McCarthy didn't deliver on any of his promises that he made behind closed doors to influencers to get their support for the speakership. Steve Cortez wrote a whole damn article about it on Newsweek and on Substack. I talked to him about it. He said, I will hold his feet to the fire if he doesn't deliver. Well, he didn't deliver. For him and many others that got duped into supporting him for speaker, the red line was the border and the debt ceiling fight. Well, you didn't get any. You got nothing. And right now, he's engineering another deal that won't defund anybody. It won't fund the border. It won't prevent COVID tyranny if they want to bring that back. It won't stop sending money to Ukraine for a failed war, by the way. Bound to lose. John Mearsheimer's new Substack post is absolutely fantastic. It's long, it's lengthy, but it's fantastic, and you must read it. Nothing they promised, they got. They were promised, they got. And yet, they still are supporting him. Why is that? It's like publicly, it looks like Kevin McCarthy is on Team Trump and Trump helps him. And no, Trump is just helping people. He thought it was the best interest of the Republican Party to get a speaker and look like you could govern. But they're all they're really all against him. Tom McClintock months ago, before the 2020 election, at a fundraiser. This guy is a donor who really is not a longtime Republican donor. He's used to donate to like Jim Costa and other just to survive. I mean, it's the industry he's in. You had to. He's at the event. And he's like, we're going to rock the House. We're going to take the House back. We're going to take the Senate back. And of course, he thought that was going to happen. It didn't. And then we're going to put Donald Trump back in the White House and rectify the stolen election, this fraud, blah, blah. This is a wealthy, educated guy. And they're like, no, actually, we're going, we meaning the leadership, we're going with DeSantis. I mean, this has been in play for a long time, folks. Long time. And they lied to you, by the way. That's fine. You want to run for president? That's fine. But when I told the country and the world, whatever, that he was gearing up to run, that this was in fact the plan, that he was in fact meeting with McCarthy's donors, that Paul Ryan absolutely wanted DeSantis, they lied. So, and this one lied too. I knew Ed Rollins was doing this work. I don't know why he denied it. Ready for Ron Pack. Chief admits Trump is undefeatable. Ed Rollins, a recent co-chair of the pro-Ron DeSantis super PAC, Ready for Ron, has admitted that, quote, no one in the Republican primaries is going to defeat President Trump, adding, Trump has a strong, solid base. It's gotten stronger as he's gone through these terrible indictments. The fact that he's been indicted on 91 counts is just absurd. Here we go. Here we go. This is the Rollins rollover. Been happening since the 80s, since Reagan. Work your ass off to beat the candidate that the base wants, lose, and then be chummy again. The first chance you get to stab him in the back, you stab him in the back, but then when you lose, you come back groveling. The Rollins rollover, baby. This isn't the first time that Rollins has expressed criticism of Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign. In July, he announced he was backing down from DeSantis, calling the Florida governor a, quote, flawed candidate, unquote. We read that, remember? Addressing the flurry of midsummer donor calls for a DeSantis campaign reboot. Rollins said, a top-to-bottom makeover and real accountability may be the only thing that saves Ron DeSantis. But even then, you still have the governor at the top. And it is getting harder and harder by the day to see not just his people as the problem, but him as the problem, unquote. Listen, I told you this from the beginning. The influencers, all his surrogates, making an enemy out of the majority of the party, people they trust, people they find credible, people who have been in the trenches with them, was an absolutely stupid idea, and they have hurt Ron DeSantis very badly. But the core of his problem was him. Running for governor is not running for president. I told you all, he's an awkward dude. I've met him. He's awkward, and he gives you the impression he really doesn't want to be talking to you. Like he's got something else he wants to do. He doesn't have the human connection. He didn't have a justification to do this. Every presidential candidate needs a justification. I think even Vivek has a better justification going back to what exactly was asking. And with hardcore Trump support, could Vivek do it? You know what? Maybe. Maybe, exactly. I'm not sold 100% yet, but Trump's strength comes from certain groups. Vivek's not going to get all of them. And he's certainly I think there are some groups that Vivek may get hurt with. And I'm wondering if like his potential to do better among younger voters who want to vote for Donald Trump this time it could carry over. And if so, is that enough to offset the loss in the support for, because he's claiming he's going to win these coalitions that nobody else can. I don't see him relating to the Black community the way Trump is relating to the Black community right now. I don't see it. By the way, Selena Zito just put up a great thing about Pennsylvania. Sean Parnell retweeted it and said, if it's happening in Allegheny County, rest assured it's happening in other battleground states. It is. Trump's boost with Black voters is real. I think we had him at 8% in 2016 among Black voters. 8%, something like that. 12%, which is exactly what the NEP National Election Poll, Edison Research pegged him at. Others had him lower, like 8%. I think it was Pew. But actually tended to think that it was higher than that. And the bottom line is, we weren't one of those pollsters that had Trump at 20, 25%. Never. Never. In individual states, did he do better with Black voters? Yes. But nationally, no. Never 19%, like we have him now. When you dig into that, see who they are, it's real. And I just don't know that Vivek, what if he loses that and then he loses white evangelicals, right? Ron DeSantis currently is getting, let's go back. I don't want to get off that topic here, but against Biden, excuse me, Trump is getting evangelicals by race. Trump gets nationally 67 to 21. He's leading among white evangelicals. DeSantis is only leading 58.7 to 21. All right. So Trump outperforms DeSantis with evangelicals. And rest assured, they're going to come out in force if Donald Trump's on the ballot, because they have. That's what they do. I just, he would need to keep all those groups. And I just don't know. Maybe, though, is my answer. Because he could maybe do a little bit better with educated people. No, he's not going to do great. But, I just don't know. Anyway, it is not just former DeSantis supporters turned detractors like Rollins who are expressing a sense of inevitability regarding Trump's winning the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. Jeff Rowe, chief strategist for the pro-DeSantis super PAC Never Back Down, we talked about this last week, was caught on a leaked audio recording telling donors, I heard that he knew he was being recorded. Was caught on a leaked audio recording telling donors the campaign was in desperate need of $50 million and that DeSantis only has 60 days to try and defeat Trump before the primary race is over. Recent polling shows Trump with a near insurmountable lead. It is insurmountable according to historical according to the historical record. It is insurmountable insofar as nobody has ever beat a candidate leading by this margin. Polling conducted immediately after the first Republican primary debate showed no change in Trump's lead, despite the media trying to stoke voter backlash against the former president for deciding not to participate. Also, there was just like you want to talk about a bubble. There was this very bubble-like reaction from Team DeSantis that he had the breakout moment he needed and he was going to surge. And That's not the case. Many of us who found post-debate bumps found bumps for bumps. Okay, not surges, bumps. Found them for Vivek and for Nikki Haley, actually. Although I'll tell you, I don't know if it's out yet. Probably not out yet, but you're gonna be really shocked by one poll unless something changes or my advice. But one shows a bump for someone else. I'm just gonna leave it at that, which is really different than everybody else. I mean, Ron's justification for running is his wife who is pushing this. She is Hillary of the right. You know, I'm not going to say that's an unfair thing. I know that his wife had a huge hand in making him run. Some of the stuff that was said was just ludicrous in the face of, overwhelming evidence that, I noticed that Steve has been quiet about Ron. He's been posting a bunch of financial stuff, but he lost a lot of his followers. He did. And it's a shame. It's a shame. Not his daughter, though. His daughter's got a good, strong, smart girl. Smart girl. Yes, I'm giving you a compliment. You're a smart girl. I remember Dobbs would bring in Rollins and Michael Goodwin at the New York Post. Absolutely. But remember this. Rollins was anti-Trump way before he was pro-Trump. And Rollins likes to talk about his work with Reagan, but he was among those people who did not warm up to Reagan initially. Let's see what else. Yeah, any more questions about the polling tranches? You all understand this because we're going to be using this. We're going to be using this language moving forward, and I'm not going to constantly say, remember, that's what this is. So I want you to make sure that you got a solid grip on it, and nobody is lost in the sauce. I'm just looking for Florida. Where's Florida? Here we go. I could have swore. Because it's weird. It's like nationally, Trump's just under 70 with white evangelicals, but when you poll the states, he's way higher. So for instance, in Florida, he beats Biden 72-13 among white evangelicals when it's just a head-to-head with someone else. DeSantis only beats him 61-12. With West in the race, Trump beats him 72-14 again. And those undecideds, they're going to go to Trump. They are. He's going to win overwhelmingly with those. And with DeSantis versus West, DeSantis wins 63.7 to 11.7. So let's see the write-ins. Are they evangelical? Funny, we were talking about Vivek. There were 16 white evangelicals in Florida who said, if my guy's not the nominee, I will write in somebody, and then in fact did. With Biden versus DeSantis, without Cornel West in, 95.4% of white evangelicals wrote in Donald Trump. 4.6%, which really represents just one, wrote in Vivek Ramaswamy. That's interesting. Let's see about the write-ins with West. Not much different at all. 95.7% chose Donald Trump, and that's actually 2 write-ins more. And 1 chose Vivek. So that's where they're coming. So that underperformance with Ron DeSantis against Joe Biden among white evangelicals is not, this is what people need to start understanding. This is not due to name recognition. This is not, Trump has universal name ID and so does Biden. Ron DeSantis does. He is approached basically, in most polls it is universal, but in some it's just near. I get that. But it doesn't matter. That's not what it is. And it says Ron DeSantis, Republican. So we always do it like a ballot would show. So the fact is, this underperformance is coming from people writing him in. It's really that simple. It really is. If you go with Trump versus Biden, 146 overall and 105 for Donald Trump. Now let's go to DeSantis. It is, those are write-ins, excuse me. 146 overall with only 89 for Ron DeSantis. So some of them go to, is it third party? They're 6.5% go to third party, 8.8 are undecided, but 11.1 are saying I would write in. So 1/10, and almost every single one of them go to Donald Trump. That's big. That's big. It's big. I mean, folks, I really thought that DeSantis was going to be leading in Florida regardless. And by the way, in our June poll in Florida, both Trump and Ron DeSantis were beating Joe Biden. DeSantis was a few points weaker, but not, nothing at all. Like it was a solid lead. I mean, if you're up 4 or 5 in a presidential election in Florida, that's big. That is now vaporized. It's gone. Gone. All right, so let's see what else we got here. Well, it's 1:58. Okay, it's time, I guess, to do it. But everybody, let me just read after I said that. Everyone seems to be the Big Ten, all country now with the entire West Coast, Midwest, and Northeast, unfortunately. Yeah. Crimea River, the Stacey Abrams meme. That's good stuff. But it's more like, yeah, that fell Ron talking about Vivek's performance and the Rust Belt area. I would be very concerned about that as well. But it looks like people seem to have it down. Let me just look through Getter. Yeah. So as long as you guys think that, he's good. I just don't want anybody, and we'll go over it a little bit more, but yeah, I mean, somebody on Getter said, and Bannonites United, I do worry about certain Christians voting for a practicing Hindu. Just don't see it. Will it be a lot? Why? Because they want someone who has fundamental similar beliefs. He would have to go, look, we went through this when it was a Church of Latter-day Saint candidate. He would have to go through the ringer to demonstrate certain core shared beliefs. And I'm not sure that would work. I'm just not sure that would work. Not that I'm saying anything bad about white evangelicals at all. They have their beliefs and they're entitled to those beliefs. I just don't see them thinking those beliefs align, or at least some of them. I just don't. I don't know. But would you ever vote for a practicing Hindu for president? People tend to lie to questions like that. We'll see. Also, real quick before we go, though, I just want to say, and I'm not going to answer it, I just want to say this. Talking about all these different polling tranches today, keep something in mind. What are the odds with everything going on with these indictments that there's a social desirability bias resulting in Donald Trump's support level in the polls actually being lower than it actually is in real life? He has been subject to significant social and response biases in polling. We know that. People are getting thrown in jail for supporting the man. I can see it in responses from people who refuse to participate. I'm not going to answer it, but I think we would be foolish. Maybe there's not at all, but we would be foolish to not at least explore the possibility that people being thrown in jail for significant sums of time or the rest of their life would cause people to give pause. And, I really do believe that. All right, don't forget, sign up for Locals. Now is the time. peoplespundit.locals.com. That's where the central hub is for everything you want. Early results for polling, other stuff as well. And of course, it will detail when we're going on the show. And for instance, you need a last minute for today or something like that. Locals got it first. And then, of course, it is just it is a community like no other social network can be. Everyone is, I very rarely have to say, be nice to each other. That's just not the environment that it fosters. And it's great. Now it's time to sign up to it. peoplespundit.locals.com. And don't forget, public polling project link is in the description. Contribute if you can, when you can. Share it far and wide with like-minded people. Build that contributor base so we don't have to rely so much on the larger the base, the less burden it is on individuals. So that's fantastic. And that's what we're aspiring to do. And the rest of the time, when we don't make it, we kick in for it. Right? Again, the link is right in the description, but you could just go to bigdatapoll.com, scroll down. One is almost completely funded totally. And then we'll move on. We'll talk about what we're going to do, whether that's going to be another national poll or that's going to be another early state poll. We'll decide that. We'll have that conversation. All right. So it depends when we're going to get kicked off, with the next one. And we'll go from there. All right. So again, as always, folks, thanks for joining. Also, thanks to our sponsors, 4patriots.com, promo code TPP10 at checkout, and Jam and Bean. All links are in the description. TPP40 at checkout to get yourself 40% off new subscription, and then still right off the bat, and then still 10% on every subsequent renewal. All right. Nothing but love for you. See you tomorrow. We are having another episode. See you tomorrow on the next episode of Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. We're going to continue a little bit of a recap from this, but we got so much to talk about, so it won't be long. Hope you guys got as much as you could out of this, and I'll see you tomorrow. All the best, folks. All the best. Oh, and deuces. I got it, Laura. I remember.